Hello everyone, in the video I would like to give some details about the post-processing plugin and also how effects are set it and works there. And yeah, let me start. So the idea of post-processing is that we have several effects which apply as the overlay with a specific GLSL GPU shader. And all the shaders are in the folder shaders, which is actually called the correct name of this folder. If we open this folder is GLSL. So this is where we collect all the fragment and vertex shaders. And when we do post-processing, there is also the post-build stage on where we copy the DLL into the motion builder, but also we copy our updated project GLSL into the plugins GLSL, so that these shaders will be loaded within the project, within the plugin. Because the code that we have for loading the shader and locating the shader file is it's looking for a path where the plugin is located. Yeah, so there are plugins, and the main entry point on how we apply effect, where we load effect and store in memory, is actually our effect chain. So we have here enumerated with all the effects that we have in the count. Yeah, and there is the base class for the every effect, which has some virtual functions that every effect should override to assign the correct what is the effect name, what is the vertex shader and fragment shader we're using, how we prepare uniforms, collect information from UI, and how we do every pre-pass. Yeah, so then we have every effect here, like post effect fisheye, etc. And then in the main class is the post effect chain, where we store the allocated instances of every effect. So this class is taking care about storing these instances and free memory from them. And this effect chain, why it's called chain? Because the effects I apply as the overlay one by one. So at the beginning, so let me show this entry method is process called. So at the beginning from the settings, and settings is actually our user object that we drop into motion builder scene to tweak parameters for the effects or toggle what effect we want to use. So if we go to these parameters, we see that this is the post-process data file, which is actually the user objects, user object in motion builder, so something that we drop into the scene. And we have these animatable parameters if we want to toggle some effect, if what lights it will use, and what are the flare amount, position, etc. What adjustments. So that's something properties from the user that we want to pass into the shader during our chain apply flow. Yeah, in case of lens flare, if we define several lights, then it will be this amount of passes. How many lights, how many passes we have then. So that means that the lens flare apply lights one by one. So it has this 2D plane where we're trying to apply fragment shader of effect of lens flare, and then use this result as the source for applying another light, etc. So how many passes we have. So this effect chain is computing how many effects we should apply in a specific frame when we do rendering. And then it's doing some preparation for, in case of screen space ambient occlusion, we want to have linear derps information that we bind into texture slot 2. In case of derps of field, we want derps information that we bind in texture slot 1. And then if there is any effect we want to apply, we start our process and doing a chain processing one by one for every effect. So we bind effect, we do some pre-pass, we bind a texture which is the source. So the first time we apply, it's actually the source is the 3D, the color from the rendering of 3D image. And then we draw our 2D overlay plane when we bind the destination buffer. So there are two buffers, the source, which was started with the 3D scene rendering. And then there is destination buffer, which waiting for like fill in with the result from Texels, from the fragment shader. So we draw this overlay to the plane and render it into destination. And after we finish, we swap buffers. So now destination becomes source, and we're ready to apply next effect. And next effect will render into destination and do a swap, and so on. And also if we have passes, the same will be for every pass. So if we have several lights on lens flare, we will do the same trick with the swap buffers. When we finish with the effect, we unbind, and if some additional steps like blur is needed, but it's mostly for ambient occlusion, and they're so filled, I think. And output preview is how we actually prepare and send texture to the tablet. Yeah, so this is effect chain. So basically, if we want to create a new effect, we need to add it to our enumeration, but we also need to define some properties, lens flare name, vertex, and fragment shader we will use. You can see it's a simple. That means that most of effects they're using the same vertex shader. We don't care about this because there is no operations, no math, nothing happened in the vertex shader. We're just drawing this 2D overlaying rectangle. In case of fish eye, we need a specific code because it's subdivided plane, which we're also trying to deform on the vertex side, on the vertex shader. So it's not only fragment effect. Yeah, so when we define all this, we also need to have our class derived from the post effect base. So let's locate the lens flare, and we see that we derive it from the post effect base, and we return what is the name of a shader, what vertex and fragment shaders we will use, and then we prepare some uniforms to get a connection with the actual fragment shader. So you see there are uniforms declared here. So it's a light position, texture white high, and the color sample that we bind to apply effect on it. And yeah, so we find all these uniforms to be ready to run our shader. Then in collect UI values, we look into our persistent data object and trying to get data from it. So trying to see how many lights are there. So that will be our setup of how many passes we will have, and grab the positions and colors of every light. And also, yeah, if the shader is binding, that we're trying to bind default values for the uniforms. So that's what we're doing. And then every prep pass is, so what is different in every prep pass is actually the uniforms for the current processed light position and light color. Yeah, so that's for this effect. And then in the effect chain, we have this factory class. Where's the factory? Post effects buffer. No, I need the chain, and then there is the shader factory. So this is the method which is allocating memory for a specific type. So we specify what type we want to allocate memory for, and we create a new instance of this class and return it. So then we can see that on the load shaders method in the post effect chain, we allocate memory for every shader, and then we go into load every shader and yeah, define some default uniforms if needed. So it depends on what shader, where is our shaders? Yeah, so some default uniforms we define. And then we also need to free, after we finish with the effect chain, we free memory. Probably it could be done automatically because every variable here is actually unique pointer. So probably it could be free memory automatically. Yeah, that's it. I think what I was thinking to say. Let me think what is missing here. So the effect chain, preparing every shader, adding into the chain, preparing uniforms to get connected with the code. Then we process chain one by one. We collect information from UI. We bind shader. We bind the source buffer. We draw our overlay rect. with the shader. So the shader apply all the needed adjustments for the texels. We draw it into destination and then we swap buffers. So yeah, and then this folder GLSL which store all our shaders. When we build, we also copy the shaders because now they're stored in the project file, but they have to be called into this, copied into destination. So when we load the plugin in Motion Builder, we should be able to locate our changes and locate the shader. Yeah, I think that's it. That's the main things. Feel free to ask your questions. Hopefully the video is helpful to start playing around with it. Thank you. Bye.